Hi. I often talk about service objects as a way of dealing with a Rails request, as a way of escaping from the Rails framework. The thing is, the service object idea comes in many different flavors, and many people use it in different ways. So in this screencast, I would like to show you one example, one variation of using the service object. We start on the left side. This is a sequence diagram. So on the left side, there is some kind of web. We don't care about it here. We have a typical Rails controller. It has some action. It can be create, update, whatever we need. It receives some params. First, what we do with the params is we use the form object idea. You can think of it as just a simple data structure that can encapsulate the params that come from the Rails framework. You could say that you can use params as it is, as a hash, but I like to wrap it with some kind of object that is under my control and not use the hash directly. Okay, once I have the form object, I can call the service object. Let's call it, for example, change password. And then so I call it the user ID with form. User ID usually comes from some kind of cookie or whatever else placed in the controller. We have this form data structure. From the point of view of the service object, it's not a form, it's some kind of data structure. We think about the interface more than what it really is, thanks to duck typing. Now, what the service object does, it needs to load the data from the database. And we use the concept of the repository. Repository encapsulates the database here. And we call load user and pass user ID. Because we use Rails, most likely we use Active Record. Active Record is a very good library to use for retrieving data from the database, but I don't like to use it for more than that. So I think of it I think of Active Record object as a simple data structure. So I called find user ID, which is basically the user.find user ID. This returns the Active Record object to the repository, and now the repository calls a method inside called build user, which, given the Active Record object, builds a business object called user. So let's not confuse those two. Those are two different objects. User is a business object, Active Record is a data structure. We can use some builder objects here. I like to have them inside the repo. That's simple. So once the repo loaded the user, often we want to load it with some other objects. Here we just assume it's just a simple user object. The user business object is returned to the service object, so that the service object can call some certain action. So user do some action. In our case, it can be user change password, given some params. And here, the user object can do this stuff. Afterwards, what happens is, if everything is good, we want to probably call repo.update password. I missed this line here. So repo.update password here, and then we have it saves to the database. It can use Active Record as well under the hood. And if everything is fine, there is no exception for nothing else, for the simplicity of this example, we can say this finished, the flow finished here. So we are back in the controller, and the controller can do something. It can redirect, it can render, or something else. And often example is the need of having some data returned from the service object, like maybe the user object can return and rendered. We have two ways. We can either return the user object from the service, from this call method, that's one way, but this may be sometimes a bit too coupled with the idea of service object and query object. So another idea is to first call the service object and then call a thing that I call query object, which just loads the data from repository and returns the data so that it can be passed back to the view. So I know this example was a bit simplistic, but it also wasn't a trivial one. I know, given if you compare it to a typical Rails way, where you just have controller and Active Record, this may look a bit complicated, but the whole idea is to be able, well, there are many different advantages about it, which is not the point of this screencast to show, but one idea is that basically everything here is, apart from the Active Record, is outside of the Rails framework. I can test it in isolation, I can test it quickly without hitting the database, I can replace the repo with in-memory implementation, and that's much simpler. And that's also very similar to hexagonal architecture, that's also very similar to clean architecture. So I hope it does shed some light into what service objects are. I know for some of you maybe those concepts are new. If you follow our blog, our RKNC blog, you can find more examples of those ideas. So thank you very much for listening.